Hold fast, you men. Keep the sails trimmed.
On October 11, 1775, the crew of the whaling vessel Herald was navigating the icy waters off the coast of Greenland when the lookout spotted something unusual on the horizon. Emerging from the dense Arctic mist was a battered, three-masted merchant ship, its sails torn to ribbons and its rigging coated in a thick layer of frost. It was drifting aimlessly, moving only with the pull of the ocean current. Hoping to salvage the vessel or assist any survivors, the captain of the Herald sent a small boarding party across the freezing water. When the men stepped onto the wooden deck, they were met with an oppressive, absolute silence. There were no signs of life, yet there were no signs of a struggle either. It was only when they descended into the dark, sub-zero belly of the ship that they realized they were not alone. In the galley, a man sat on the floor, a tinderbox still held tightly in his hand. In a nearby cabin, a woman lay wrapped in heavy blankets, her eyes open but glassy, next to the body of a young boy. And in the captain's quarters, the commander of the vessel sat rigidly at his desk, a pen still gripped in his frozen fingers, as if he had been interrupted mid-sentence. The ship had been missing for 13 years, and the crew had been frozen in time. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are exploring one of the most haunting and enduring legends of the high seas, the mysterious final voyage of the Octavius. To understand how a ship could become a floating tomb for over a decade, we have to look back to the year 1761. At this time, the global economy relied entirely on merchant shipping, but the routes were long, grueling, and dangerous. To trade with Asia, European ships had to sail all the way around the southern tip of Africa or South America, journeys that took many months and cost countless lives to disease and shipwrecks. In the autumn of 1761, a cargo ship named the Octavius arrived in London. It was a sturdy, well-built merchant vessel preparing for a lucrative voyage to China. The captain, whose exact name has been lost to time but is often reported as John Hendrickson, was an experienced mariner. He was so confident in the ship and his crew that he decided to bring his wife and young son along for the journey. The voyage to China was a massive success. The Octavius arrived safely, traded its goods for valuable silk, tea, and porcelain, and prepared for the return leg. However, as the captain looked at his charts, he grew restless. The traditional route home would take months of repetitive, exhausting sailing. He began to consider a radical, highly dangerous alternative. For centuries, sailors had whispered about the Northwest Passage, a hypothetical sea route through the Arctic Ocean connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans above North America. If it existed, and if it was navigable, it would cut the journey time to Europe in half. But it was entirely unmapped, notorious for unpredictable weather, and choked with insurmountable ice. Against the better judgment of maritime experts of the era, the captain decided to gamble the lives of his crew, his family, and his ship on the Arctic shortcut. The Octavius departed from the coast of China in the spring of 1762, steering a course north toward the Bering Strait. According to early accounts, the weather initially cooperated. The summer of that year was unseasonably warm, and the coastal waters of Alaska appeared clear of the heavy pack ice that usually guarded the northern frontier. The crew was optimistic. They believed they were on the verge of making maritime history. By late autumn, however, the brief Arctic summer came to an abrupt end. The temperature plummeted with terrifying speed, dropping far below zero in a matter of hours. The open lanes of blue water began to slush over, hardening into thick, unyielding sheets of ice. Huge icebergs, carried by powerful northern currents, began to hem the Octavius in from all sides. The captain quickly realized the gravity of his mistake, but the realization came too late. The shifting ice pack closed around the wooden hull like a vice. Within days, the Octavius was completely locked fast, trapped in the frozen wastes somewhere north of Point Barrow, Alaska. They were hundreds of miles away from any form of human civilization. with no way to call for help. Inside the wooden hull, the situation rapidly turned catastrophic. The ship was well provisioned for a standard merchant voyage, but it was never outfitted to survive an Arctic winter. They had a limited supply of food and, more importantly, a strictly finite amount of fuel for heat. As the weeks turned into months, the coal and firewood began to disappear. The crew was forced to burn whatever they could find: spare lumber, cargo crates, and eventually parts of the ship's non-essential interior structures. But it was not enough. The extreme cold began to seep through the seams of the ship, coating the interior walls with thick layers of frost. The human body cannot long endure such conditions without heat. One by one, the crew members began to succumb to hypothermia and malnutrition. They didn't die in agony or chaos. Instead, the extreme cold induced a state of severe drowsiness. Sailors simply sat down to rest, fell asleep, and never woke up. The final moments of the crew were recorded in the ship's logbook. The entries grew shorter, the handwriting increasingly shaky as the captain's fingers lost their dexterity. He documented the deaths of his crew, the dwindling supplies, and the bitter realization that they would never see home again. The last entry was dated November 11th, 1762. It noted that the fire had finally gone out, that his wife and son had passed away in their sleep, and that he was the only one left with the strength to hold a pen. After that, the record went completely silent. For the next 13 years, the Octavius vanished from the face of the earth. It became a ghost story, whispered among sailors in ports across the world. Most assumed the ship had been crushed by the ice and dragged to the bottom of the Arctic Ocean. But the ice did not destroy the Octavius. Instead, it preserved it. When the boarding party from the Herald stepped into the captain's cabin 13 years later, they were entirely unprepared for what they found. Because the Arctic air acted as a natural deep freeze, the bodies of the crew had not decomposed. They looked exactly as they had the moment they died, frozen solid into a state of permanent preservation. The boarding party's lantern light flickered across the face of the captain. He was still sitting straight up at his desk, his eyes half open, staring blankly ahead. The inkwell on his desk was solid ice, and the pen was still frozen to his fingers. Terrified by the macabre scene, the whalers realized they were standing in a tomb. The air inside the cabin was so cold that their own breath obscured their vision. The men hurriedly grabbed the ship's logbook from the desk, desperate to find answers, and fled back up to the fresh air of the deck. But as they scrambled back to their rowboat, they made a startling realization. The Octavius had been trapped in the ice north of Alaska in 1762. Yet here it was, drifting freely in the open waters near Greenland in 1775. Over the course of 13 years, the shifting Arctic ice pack had slowly carried the trapped, dead ship through the entire length of the Northwest Passage. The captain had achieved his goal of finding the shortcut, but he and his crew had only navigated it as ghosts. The boarding party returned to the Herald in a state of sheer panic. The psychological toll of standing among the perfectly preserved dead was too much for the sailors to bear. In their haste to escape the cursed vessel, the men had been careless with the frozen logbook. Because the binding was completely brittle from over a decade of extreme cold, many of the frozen pages cracked and broke away into the sea as they rowed back. Only the very first few pages and the final haunting entry from November 1762 survived. The captain of the Herald, spooked by the narrative outlined in the surviving pages and fearing a curse, refused to salvage the Octavius or recover the bodies. He ordered his crew to steer away immediately. The Octavius was left to the mercy of the sea. Over the next few weeks, the currents carried the phantom ship further out into the Atlantic. It was never seen again. Investigators and historians believe that once the ship reached warmer southern waters, the ice holding its hull together finally melted, causing the battered vessel to take on water and sink to the ocean floor, taking its silent crew with it. Because the logbook was largely destroyed and the ship was lost to the depths, the story of the Octavius occupies a strange space between historical fact and maritime legend. While some historians believe the tale was an embellishment of real, undocumented Arctic tragedies, the image of a ship navigating the deadly Northwest Passage, manned entirely by the dead, remains one of the ocean's most chilling mysteries. What do you think happened to the Octavius? Do you believe a ship could truly drift through the Arctic ice completely untouched for 13 years? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more stories from the darker side of history. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.